I'd like to welcome everybody to the Hire Talents podcast, optimizing the hiring process for entrepreneurs by entrepreneurs. Today I've got Michael Yinger. He's a career talent acquisition guy. They've built a great talent acquisition tool, and he's really passionate about what he's done. He's in this his whole career, and he's really been in the RPO, the recruitment process outsourcing type of realm. And I thought that was interesting. I haven't had anybody on this, and it's not really my realm, but there are organizations, especially now here with post-COVID, right? They're having to scale up huge numbers of people fast, right? And that, creates a whole nother, problem than just trying to select one or two great people. So, today, volume hiring, getting it done right and fast the first time is really going to be the focal point of our topic here. So thank you, Michael, for joining us. Please tell us a little bit more about your background. I gave a brief info, but tell us more about how you ended up in the software side. I know you had a nice career in recruiting for that.
Yeah. So thanks for the intro, Fletcher. I actually sort of backed into the talent acquisition space from doing a little consulting, and I started doing some consulting for one of the early RPO firms. At the time, we were called Sphereon. Some people might still remember that name. And so I worked my way through the organization doing implementation, and then doing technology management, and then finally doing delivery and sales and product management at my last firm. I had a COVID event like a lot of people did. And so I was out looking for opportunities, and some folks that I knew from previous came to me and said, look, we've got this tool. We'd like you to come help us take it forward. And that tool we call the Sieve, and that's the engagement that I'm working on now, Resume Sieve. The idea was that, helping recruiters evaluate and rank resumes and doing it quickly. So it ties in with the high volume in terms of that. There's some really good use case there. And I know that's not particularly our topic, but that's what our focus is. And so I've been doing that for about 14 months at this point.
Nice. Awesome. Well, that sounds really exciting. And, definitely, everywhere we can automate or streamline, especially when we're in volume situations, is definitely important. But I think what I'll be really interested, and I think the audience will be interested to learn more about, is kind of some of those best practices, right? What are the theories and philosophies? So if you're thinking about how you're going to do that effectively, and what are you looking for, right? If you had to evaluate 10,000 resumes quickly, how do you do that effectively? And this comes up from time to time in the S&B space. You get companies are about to go into hyper growth mode, or maybe they're going to add 10 or 15 people. For them is hyper growth, right? They're going to need to collect a lot of resumes, and maybe we have time. We should talk about that, because that's always a challenge. Right. Like, where do you even get
right now, especially
a few thousand candidates to begin with, right? Like, just getting them in the door, let alone trying to evaluate them. But best practices around doing that effective volume, so it's not a burden. How did you guys do it in the RPO space? How do you systemize it?
Well, you're right. It is a real challenge. And typically in the RPO space, you're dealing with larger clients, and you're dealing with people with a pretty good set of technology, some sort of applicant tracking system that can help you with the process. Now, the applicant tracking systems aren't perfect either, because they tend to stay away from ranking. They're really good at collecting and organizing and processing. It still falls to the recruiter to do the ranking. And so, in the early days of applicant tracking systems, you'd have 100 resumes. Well, you couldn't evaluate all 100. So you just do the first 50, and you'd make your slate from the first 50, unless you didn't find anybody. And then you go to the next, oh, no, that's not good enough. We'll do every other one. Well, so you look for tools. Quite frankly, there are two ways to do it.
That make it easier, right?
Make it easier, and what in terms of what are you looking for? You're looking for consistency. You're looking for eliminating the bias that goes into the resume evaluation process. I'll just share a short story with you. I was talking to a TA director who posted one job. She was trying to hire a recruiter. She got 700 resumes in 36 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, what did you do? And she said, well, I printed them all. 3 of us spent 4 weeks, and we came up with our slate, and we hired one person. That's just.
And they printed every single resume. Yeah.
They print them all out because they you know, so, it's just you hear stories like that, and you think, well, you know, there are easier ways to do that.
Yeah, there's easier ways to skin that cat.
There are easier ways to.
Yeah. So I fell into the recruiting space, you know, myself, and you know, we're a talent assessment company, and we spend a lot of time coaching our clients on just best hiring practices in general, because, you know, again, back to this thing, like if you don't have a pool of people to assess, interview, or vet, period, well, however you want to assess them, like whether you're using a sieve, you know, to match resumes, or using assessments, or or just interviewing somebody, they're all forms of assessment, right? But if there's nobody in the pool, you can't do it. So, you know, I go out and, you know, one of my clients says, you know, well, why don't you do it for us? And so we spun out a little retained search, and we did my first couple of searches, you know, back in the day. And, you know, I got emailed a ton of resumes. I was actually pretty good at collecting resumes. I had like, you know, several hundred, and they're all emailed, they're all sitting in my inbox, and I would like go through them, and then you know, I'd scratch a bunch of them, like, no, definitely not. But then I'd end up with like 70 or like resumes that I put, and I would print them out, and and I put them into piles on my desk, you know, A, B, and C, right? Like, and then I took the A's, and I would start calling all the A's. And I did that for like 2 months, and I was like, okay, this is crazy, right? Like, there's got to be a better way, a better use of my time, you know. And then I discovered the applicant tracking system, you know, and literally my life, you know, changed. I can process 100 resumes in 15 minutes.
Yeah, right.
Now, I couldn't do that like day one. It took a little practice, right?
Sure.
But, you know, but that takes me to like, well, how do you do that, right? And that is, you mentioned something earlier. So you mentioned bias, you mentioned a system, like, you know, you have a way to evaluate consistency. So how do you, if you have, say, 100 or 200 or 700 resumes, and you're going to humanly evaluate them, how do you create a consistent way to evaluate those resumes?
If you're going to do it manually, if we stipulate that you're going to do it without the benefit of somebody,
let's use a tool. Like, you got to have an applicant tracking.
Okay.
Like, if anybody's not using an applicant tracking system out there, go, like, I mean, I'm sorry, guys. Like, go hide under a rock somewhere. Like, they're so inexpensive. Like, just go get any applicant tracking system. You know, hopefully a good one. Like, go get one. But you still going to look at that many resumes manually.
Right. Yeah. So the, you know, if you're using an ATS, generally the first way that you weed out is you do pre-screening questions. So I just, you know, it's interesting. People say we can't find anybody these days. I posted a job at 10:30 last night for a salesperson. As of 9:30 this morning, I already had 15 applicants. Yeah. So there's still people out there looking for jobs. So this idea, that you can't find them, there are people out there. Anyway,
theoretically, in 30 days, you'll have 450 applicants.
That's right. And so what did I do? I put in pre-screening questions. There's certain things that I'm not going to hire a salesperson who's got less than 5 years sales experience. Yeah. And so, you know, if they're answering the question honestly, then they're eliminated. So that's the first thing, right? You can do some pre-screening. What some companies are doing is that they're doing assessments. You know, as soon as somebody applies, they're putting them through an assessment. They're using the assessment to further call the list. Yeah. And so now you're down to just the ones that you want to evaluate. Well, you do have to have a system, because even in the ATSs, some of the more sophisticated ones, maybe you can do some Boolean searching. And so you could say, I want these 3 or 4 skills, and it will bring up just the resumes in your stack that have those 3 or 4 skills. You know, you run the risk of you know, it's limited, and you know, what do you do with it? But that's just using the tools to their greatest advantage. There are, you know, there are any number of, you know, particularly now some of the CRMs are adding some AI capability that will actually evaluate the person's social presence and make some judgments around, you know, what are they going to do? What might they do? But it's, you know, at the end of the day, if you're using those kind of systems, it's still going to come down to the recruiter going through a stack and evaluating that stack. Now, in the ATS, you're probably looking at their application. The advantage there is that all the applications look the same, because that's what it is. It's an application.
So
when you're looking at a resume,
yeah, the resume.
Exactly right. It makes
Oh.
you can scan it and say, do they have Java? Do they have Agile? Have they been employed for 3 years? You know, whatever your criteria is, it doesn't have to be tech, but whatever your criteria, you can generally pick that up relatively quickly off the application. But if you're doing it manually, if you're using one of the smaller ATSs, some of which are the small systems with smaller companies, right? I won't name names because I'm not trying to shame anybody. They don't, they just have the applicants here they are. And so the only difference is you get to see them on a screen instead of you're printing it out of the email. You still have to go through all the resumes to decide who you're going to do. And if you want to be compliant, you want to follow, the rules because you're worried about, CCP or something like that. You got to keep track of how you're going through them. What we used to tell our recruiters, if you go through the first one in the stack, however big the stack is, you have to go through the whole stack. And so if you do
you got to give everybody a fair shake, right?
So if you do a search and that search turns up 500 people who have whatever your search criteria is, redo the search. Because you can't go through 500.
Make it
so
zero.
See, I think
you bring up a good point, and I think this is where I see a lot of people make, pretty, fatal error, right? Is they don't set the parameter of the search up front correctly, right? Now that starts, and what I'm talking about is not your Boolean search. I'm talking about your job description.
Yes.
The ones that make me cringe the most are like when people go, a lot of entrepreneurial circles, and they'll put a post on Facebook and be like, hey, does anybody have a job description for a salesperson? Like, you mean you're going to use somebody else's job description for your job? Like,
right.
What are you freaking out of your mind? I get why people do that, but it's like, okay, it takes time, it takes effort, but if you don't set the stage, if you don't sit there and do a job analysis, which doesn't have to be a complicated scientific thing. It's a process, but you got to actually understand what it is that you expect this person to do and what they need, what tools, skills, experiences, background they need in order to be more likely to be successful at doing that. And you got to do the time. You got to put the time in to do that, right?
Exactly. So you were talking about, well, how do you go about the evaluation? And so, if you're going to be organized around it, then before you start evaluating the resumes, you should know what you're looking for. And this will probably ring true to you from recruiting. One of the most difficult things that I have found recruiters have to deal with is they have their criteria, whatever it is, and they go through and they come up with their list of their top candidates, and they go to the hiring manager, and the hiring manager says, well, what if we ask for this? Then you have to go back and do the whole thing over again because that okay.
That happens because the hiring manager didn't spend the time up front to analyze the job and determine what they really wanted to begin with, right? And they just wasted.
Or they've created something, which also happens, that just can't be filled, and so the recruiter comes with the best possible combination of things, and maybe it was, well, you got to have 3 years of this and 4 years of that, and the hiring manager and the recruiter says, look, I can't find anybody with 3 years of this and 4 of this, and the hiring manager says, okay, well, then you can take that one down to 2, and whatever, but it still means going back and doing the whole thing over again. It's if you're using those kind of tools, it is a manual process. It's a manual process.
So how do you create successful so how do you streamline this process then so that you end up with a list of people that really do meet those expectations of the hiring manager?
Well, it's part of it is time, right? The more time you've spent working with the hiring manager, the more you're going to understand when they say, well, this or that, you're going to understand what that means, right? You're going to have a sense of how that hiring manager works. Otherwise, you're going to go through some iterations with the hiring manager. The challenge is you have to create a consistent process, and then you have to follow it. And if that process says first I do this and then I do this, that's okay. And then even before all that, one of the things that you touched on early on was ensuring you're getting the right people. That means not only understanding the job description, but understanding what have what does a successful person look like? You know, it's much like we do in advertising. What's the persona?
Yep.
You know, what is it that will make somebody successful in this job based on people who have done it?
Yes.
What does this person look like? And there are systems that will take, you know, you can take a resume or you can take a job description and sort of reverse engineer it into a search tool, right? That where you're out looking. Now, in that case, you're out looking for passive candidates, which is a whole different game, right? Passive versus the actual applicant.
So you're saying use a tool that will take, like, let's say you have 10 successful people in a customer service role, and you take their resumes and, you know, put them together, and you know, use AI to sort of create, you know,
that's right.
To look for something similar than that, right?
Yeah, it creates a search pattern and goes out and looks for it. And then, of course, the challenge with those kind of systems is then you have to tell it, did you do a good job? Did you pick people that really work? So it knows to use the same process again. You know, that's it. I mean, I'm a firm proponent in the whole concept of AI and machine learning. And what we often forget is that the system isn't really thinking on its own, because it has to have some feedback to understand whether or not it was doing the right thing or getting you to the results that you wanted to get.
And the original input too, right? So this is the whole argument around AI in recruiting, right? Is the whole bias piece, right? You get garbage in, garbage out, right? You know, and this goes back to that, you know, the fundamentals. So, you know, we're talking a little old school, we're talking a little new school here, right? Garbage in, garbage out happened in old school too, right? When the companies or hiring managers aren't bothering to do a job analysis to understand what does our successful people look like, and what do they do on the job that makes them successful, and which are the drivers of success, you know, in terms of activities, in terms of skill sets, to come up with the proper, you know, set job description analysis or persona candidate profile, right? And they do a poor job at it, it's garbage in, then the recruiters, when they're doing it manually, and the AI is not going to do any better if you feed it the same garbage, right?
Exactly. I had a guy working for me running one of the accounts, and he was old school. He knew everything there was to know about the technology, and his approach was, you spend the time up front, you work with the hiring manager to understand what an ideal candidate looks like. You use that to refine your searching, and then you don't bring 100 candidates back. You bring back the 4 that absolutely match what that hiring manager is looking for. Okay, that doesn't work, then you refine your searching. But that's, you know, that's a different kind of sourcing. That's a different kind of process than just throwing it out there on Indeed or LinkedIn and letting the applicants flow.
So Resume Sieve, in theory, kind of does something like that, right?
Yeah. Well, what we do is we say, we don't care how many resumes you have. We're going to let you create a standard job description, which you can do either by importing one or manually creating one. And then you can evaluate 1,000 resumes, 500 resumes, 250 resumes, whatever you want to do. You want to change the criteria, you change the criteria, and in a matter of seconds, you reevaluate all those resumes on that new criteria, and it brings all those candidates back. So you're still following the spirit of the law. Now they're just rank ordered. And so you look at the top 10 or you look at the top 15 instead of having to figure out, you know, that was the problem with some of those early methods where, I'll take every other one, or I'll take the first 50. Well, maybe this woman I was telling you about.
There's a chance, right?
That's this woman I was telling you about, when she did her 700 and it took her 4 weeks. And I said, well, what's wrong with that process? Not going for the obvious answer, really. And she said, yeah, I probably wanted number 701, because she shut her applications off after 36 hours. Maybe somebody who was, working that, was busy and didn't get to the job posting, but now it's already down. So you're missing out on good applicants because you can't control the volume. So, even in days like we have now, which will fade over time, where we're sort of fighting over applicants. You still have to be able to give yourself the ability to look at everybody, because you just don't know, is it the first person who applied, or is it the last
better candidate? And I always drives me crazy when people run here's my top 4, and I'm going to hire one of them. That's great if one of them actually is the person for the job. But, you know, like when people settle, right, you know, I'm in the assessment business, so a lot of times people do this to us. They'll say, well, I ran an ad and I collected 100 people, and, you know, here's the 3 best ones, and we had you assess them, and guess what, you know, we don't recommend any of them. Right. And,
Yeah.
you know, and then they're like, well, you know, which of the 3 is the best? Like, well, none of them, you know, like they're all not.
Right. Yeah.
You know, like, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
It's where do you run the assessment, and what's the assessment looking for?
Yeah.
You know, there's a whole, as you know, there's a whole psychology to that.
Hiring by finalist is a poor strategy, in my opinion, right? You know,
Yeah.
It goes to that, you know, maybe 701 was the right person, right? Like, no, you know,
right.
Hopefully, if you've got 700 people, you should be able to not hire by finalists, but find the actually right fit, right? You know.
Yeah, if you're able to go through all 700, right? That's the challenge. You're always, you know, and this person had this incredible process that they invested in, and you know, okay, knock yourself out. You know, you got that kind of resource and that kind of time to spend just to find the candidates you're going to interview. Wow, it's a little scary.
Yeah, super scary.
Yeah.
So I'm really curious, you know, this is, I don't know, just been a topic that's just like, I'm always like thinking about here is, you know, just to change gears and, you know, kind of end on a different side of this, but, because I'm just so curious on the RPO side, you know, how do big organizations, volume hiring, evaluate the cost of hiring? And I'm not talking about the cost of a recruiter or the cost of buying people uniforms or the cost of training them. I'm talking about the cost of whether or not that person gets the job done.
So you're talking post-hire evaluation, right?
Successful hiring. So how do they evaluate whether this hire was a success or not in terms of dollars?
Typically, the post-hire evaluation is where things get a little tricky, because that means that you have to have a performance management process that you have to believe in, that is fairly evaluated. We had one client that used assessments on everybody, because they had done literally, they hired 65,000 people a year. Everybody who applied was assessed. Yeah. And so that was the first filter, was the assessment. It was green and clear, right? Green, clear, yellow, red. Green and clear got through, yellow and red didn't. The hiring manager could override because, you know, that red candidate, that was Bob's brother. Let's bring Bob's brother in, right?
Yeah. So now you're not being consistent.
They had measured the performance of the candidates based on their assessment score, and they had over time had a numeric valuation to say a red candidate in an inside sales role, just as an example, is worth $1 million less a year in results versus a green candidate. And it's because they had the data. It's because they had the data. They could see, they look at the performance review. They could look at the productivity of the people. They had the sample size, all the rest.
That's the number, right? You know, that's the number. You're literally talking about $1 million hiring mistake to hire a red candidate versus a green one.
That's exactly right.
$1 million hiring mistake.
That's it. And they knew it. And, you know, of course, when you're dealing with numbers like that, you can, and you're willing to collect the data, you can come to those kinds of things. And you got, you know, 3 or 4 IOs on your staff, including the CHRO. You know, they'll figure that kind of stuff out. But that's the key to understanding those outcomes, is the ability to measure the results.
But even in SMB space, you know, however you're finding people, you can measure the productivity, the value of a new hire, right? Even just logically, right? You know, I hire a new salesperson. I give them a $5 million a year quota. In 90 days, they sell $250,000 in revenue, and then they get fired because they're short, or they quit because they don't like working here, or whatever. They don't work out, right? For whatever reason. And then it takes another 6 months to refill that. So, you know, you're somewhere around the, you know, $2 million in lost revenue created in that situation, right? You know, pick the customer service person. Like, what's the lifetime value of a customer for you? 100 grand?
Yeah, right. Could be.
Customer service
what's the
person,
contract value?
50 grand, 10 grand. Pick a number, right? I mean, it's a lot. It's going to be a lot, right? Whatever it is. That customer service person doesn't work out. They piss off the customer fires you. You just lost 10, 50, 100 grand, on that, right? I think production worker, I mean, so you can figure out what it's worth, even if you haven't done that exact number. Now figuring out whether the correlation, if you follow this process, will produce this, that definitely takes some data or a good partner, right?
It takes and data and time, right? Yeah. Because it takes time to generate the data. You got to be willing to put in the time, because over time, and it's not a huge amount. I would think for an hourly job over the course of a year, you probably could figure out what the value of that job is, what the cost is for replacement. All those kinds of things go into the hire, and you should also be looking at, can I create a persona around the people who are successful? And so I'm going and looking for them, right? And so it's things like somebody who's, and I'll go back to my hospitality example, somebody who's successful in working at the front desk in a hotel may never have worked in a hotel before.
Yeah,
they may have been a server in a restaurant or a bartender, or something like that. And so you learn through experience. And the thing about an RPO, and not to pitch RPOs in particular, an RPO that's got enough experience is going to be able to come to the table and say, in previous situations, since we don't have a baseline for you, we've hired for you yet. We've hired for other clients these kinds of roles in these kinds of situations, and this is what we have found to be successful for this kind of role for you. And so we're going to modify what we're looking for you, because you've been looking for this, and you're telling me it's not working because you got 50% turnover. Let's look for this, and let's see if we can drive your turnover down and at the same time impact your productivity. It's an iterative process, because you got to get somebody a chance to succeed. Right?
And I imagine that's a tough sell, right? Sometimes like people are just like, no, I only want other front desk people from other hotels, and you start beating your head up against the wall, but you have a 50% turnover, and that's causing you to get poor reviews on TripAdvisor, and your revenue's going down, and that hotel's going to be out of business if you don't fix it.
Someone has to be willing to listen to a new idea. I mean, that's essentially what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
But the hardest customer in the world for an RPO is somebody who says, I want to hire you because you're an expert in recruiting, and I want you to do it my way.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, why are you hiring me if your way is working for you?
Yeah, if you got it figured out, then why don't you just keep doing what you're doing, right?
Keep doing what you're doing, because you know that if you're paying me, I'm making a profit on it. So, in theory, it's a funny conversation, and it does happen. I mean, people will go out of their way.
Yeah, and I've seen that too. Like, your ideal candidate is not the one you think it is, and you can prove it to yourself just by looking at the resumes of the people on your team that are successful. And you go, you're looking for this over here, but when you look at your existing people, they don't look like that. Right?
Exactly right. That's exactly right.
And I would challenge anybody listening to this to go do that exercise. Pull the 10 resumes of the 10 best people on your team and look at those, and then compare that to what your target is when you're evaluating resumes. And I bet you 7 to 9 out of 10 of those situations, people will go, oh, my best people don't look like what I'm looking for right now.
Yeah.
Have that epiphany if they took, 10 minutes to do that exercise.
Yeah.
It won't take them very long.
Exactly. It is phenomenal what you find when you dig into the data, but it takes a commitment to look at the data, and companies that are churning are probably just more focused on, how can I slow down the churn without really thinking about what's causing the churn.
But it could be $1 million hiring mistake.
Exactly.
Just one hire. Just one hire. Low-level inside salesperson could cost you $1 million in lost opportunity, and let alone all the other roles that are probably, if they're not costing you millions, are costing you tens to hundreds of thousands. And
exactly right. Not to mention the replacement cost, right? Then you got the replacement cost.
Productivity.
Lost productivity. Yeah.
I stopped talking about the cost of hiring. Like, I don't care how much it costs to run an ad on Indeed. Look, it's going to cost you $1,000 to properly market a job. Period. Like, you're going to run $500 on Indeed, another $400 on ZipRecruiter and a couple bucks over here, a couple bucks over there in order to build a pool of adequate people, for most jobs. So 500 or $1,000. Look, that is pennies compared to the lost opportunity, either having the job not filled, right?
Yes.
Turning away work or you're doing a poor job at the work, or you're burning out your existing people and they're quitting because they're working too much or working too hard or getting beat down. So those are more costs right there. Like the cost of hiring, the time the recruiter spends, the time for the tools, the money you spend on advertising are pennies. I don't even like it when people start talking about this stuff, because it's nothing. It's dropping the bucket compared to those other things. And the biggest cost is lost opportunity. Every day that job's not filled, you're not making money, you're not delivering product or service. And even worse, every time you get the wrong person in there and they come short on their goals, you're leaving hundreds of thousands, if not millions, on the table.
Yeah, well, it's it all ties back to sort of a cost center mentality, where you're just looking at the expense.
Yeah,
and you're not really thinking about the upside. We had one client that they went into just a frenzy of hiring because their business was exploding. The problem was they had a fixed budget around talent acquisition.
Yeah.
And so we got to the end of their budget and they said, well, okay, you got to stop hiring. And we said, well, okay. And they said, but we don't have everybody we need. And we said, well, what do you want me to do about that? And more money. Isn't there an opportunity cost not filling these jobs? Go back to the people who need these jobs filled and tell them, I need more budget if you want to fill those jobs so you can make more revenue in whatever it is that you're doing. It's a funny kind of conversation that people, particularly larger companies, where there's sort of a disconnect between these things.
Small companies are doing it all the time too. They don't want to spend. $500 in advertising on Indeed, it's too expensive. Like,
compared to what? Compared to the job being vacant for an extra 2 weeks because we didn't find the right person as fast?
Yeah, or even worse, just I got 10 candidates, I picked the best of the 10 and none of them were any good. So now I've got 6 months of toiling around and screwing around with the wrong hire and not getting the job done and then starting all over again. So now, 12 months down the road, you still haven't filled the job properly.
Yeah.
And that's often what happens. It's often a 1 year mistake for companies.
Oh, sure. It could, it takes a while to realize that it's taking you time, and then you start focusing on getting it done, and then you go through iterations, and you wonder about a job that's been vacant for 6 months. Well, do you really need it? Honestly.
Yeah, I mean, you obviously don't care enough. I mean, sure, you might want it, maybe you want to fill it, but you're not putting enough importance on the value that job could create for the organization when companies do that, right? So yes, you either don't need it or you're forgetting how valuable that job is to adding more revenue and more value to your company, right? And that's why companies stay stagnant, right? They don't grow.
Yeah.
Because they're just they're penny pinching. They're worried about this little thing here and there, and then next thing you know, they're same vicious cycle over and over again. Right?
It becomes a vicious cycle. You're always playing catch up. You never catch up, and so you never really hit your full potential. It's a forest for the trees thing. I'm more concerned about my quarterly budget than I am my annual results. Yeah. Okay.
Fine. Yeah.
Well, what can you do? You can lead them to water, but that's about it.
You ain't gonna make a bunch of money in real estate or stock market unless you put some money into it, right? Just like you do your business. I mean, maybe is another way to think about it. All right, Michael, this has been a really fun chat. So I always
been great.
Love to leave us with two things that you could do in your organization that you could do tomorrow to improve your hiring results.
Sure. The first thing is spend the time up front to plan how you're going to do it. All too often people throw the thing out there and then they start getting people in and they're scrambling to get through. They're caught up in their production. It's just basic process. It's basic process thinking. If you plan it in advance, what are you looking for? What are you going to do? How are you going to handle it? You'll be much better off. Particularly, just you do all that in advance. That way you're not playing catch up.
Yeah.
The second thing, and you and I have talked about it, really understand what's the profile of the successful candidate. And it's not what the job description says.
Yeah.
The job description says, you know, what is it they're going to do, maybe some of the skills they need to have, but it's not necessarily what describes a successful candidate.
At that, right? You know,
exactly right. So understand what that is, because it may be that there's some odd quirks that are the best thing that you could find. You know, I mean, in sort of a reverse way, the crazy example you always think of is, well, you know, you got to have a bachelor's degree. Okay, well, you know, then Microsoft never would have hired Bill Gates.
Yeah.
You know, are you really thinking that through? Are your most successful people really the people with bachelor's degrees? Yeah. Maybe they are. Yeah. Maybe that is a necessary criteria.
Yeah.
You know,
but validate it.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I love that one. I mean, both of those are great pieces of advice, but that second one, I think, you know, no one's ever come here and talked about that, and I'm so overlooked. So that's great. Yeah. So Michael, tell us where we can find more information about Resume Sieve, you guys, you know, and
so a couple things. Certainly there's our website, which is ResumeSieve.com. Okay. We're on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter, all under Resume Sieve or the Sieve, either one. We're also doing some crowdfunding. So if you want to be part of the revolution, if you want to, you know, if you want to get into be a you know, a sort of a contributor to the growth, we're on wefunder.com and wefunder.com as Resume Sieve. So all ways to get a hold of us. I'm Michael at ResumeSieve.com and Michael Yinger and all the various social media. Not hard to find me.
Well,
I'm not hiding anywhere.
We'll put everything on the landing page for this and all the socials and everything. You know, we'll collect all that from you here, and everybody can get a hold of Michael if you're interested in learning more about Resume Sieve and, you know, matching your resumes to your job descriptions and streamlining that process for you, or anything else that we talked about today. So thank you very much, and appreciate your time.
Great. Thanks, Fletcher. Awesome. Appreciate it.